I'm actually going to take it slow. Most of the people here were in the basic track. That means that I'm going to try to not fry your minds with too much information. How was the basic workshop for you? Was it at your level? Was it slow? Are you okay?
Was good.
Was good? Fine. Thanks to Jorge. He's doing a very great job explaining the basics of the framework, which is, I find, is often the most difficult part to actually explain from the start. So my goals for today are, one, that you get the philosophy behind Cake 3. I think if you understand the philosophy behind the framework, you will be able to use all the features more naturally. How many of you have been using Cake 2 or Cake 1 in the past? Most of you? Okay. And most probably, a lot of you already have kind of some tricks or some hacks for the framework to make it behave the way you want, right? For example, maybe some of you already go to app model as you create your project and you add public recursive equals -1 as the first thing, right? That's a giant hack. It works. But perhaps a bit of history of how CakePHP evolved will make you understand the point where we stand and why those hacks were needed at some point. So keep in mind that CakePHP started back in 2005. That's a lot of time in computing. I mean, in 2005, I think Windows XP was the shit. In 2005, we had PHP 4. If you remember PHP 4, that was a terrible language. There was no object model whatsoever. It was some sort of what they thought objects were, and then they just created that. It was not objects. It was just some sort of structure with some methods that you could append. So the original creators of CakePHP were kind of ahead of their time and said, hey, what if we fix the language by adding a library on top of it? So that was a really interesting goal, very difficult to do, but it achieved great results in my view. So even though the language was broken, there were great features that would make it enjoyable to work with. So as the language evolved, and CakePHP evolved as well, we had PHP 5, which has a more sane object model. Well, those ideas from the past will still kept because of our user base. So for example, the way that you would retrieve the data was already popular, it was already efficient. I mean, in CakePHP, there's no other structure that has the most functions and the most bit as an array. Isn't that true? An array has like, I don't know, 23 different functions that you can operate with. But, well, the language kept evolving until this point where PHP is almost a general purpose language. You can use PHP for the console, you can use PHP for scripting, you can use obviously PHP for creating web pages, you can use it for data processing, perhaps not scientific calculation, but some people attempt to do that with some degree of success. So, we could say that at some point, CakePHP could have lacked compared to other frameworks, what they were doing. But the way we did it was to prevent or to maintain our user base happy with the tools that they already have and have already learned. Truth be told, it's now 2014. It's time to change. It's time to adopt what the language has to offer and what the vision that we had since the beginning to actually materialize it with the tools that we have at hand. So just to break the ice, I want you to just, two random people, Raise your hands and name your favorite hack that you do in Cake. Hack as in something that you think is not supposed to be done because...
I generally create a function in my app model for massaging has and belongs to many multi-select so that they'll save.
That's a great example. Yes, that's a great example. Yes?
We have a standard method in our app model as well for doing validation when you have models that are renamed. Like user model will get renamed with custom names.
Okay.
And so that way it'll do for virtual fields. When you try saving virtual fields and then stuff doesn't match properly.
Okay. That's perhaps not a hack. I think it's... But I understand because virtual fields depends on the alias. So yeah, another one?
Binding model just for the sake of the paginator component working for 3 or 4 level deep associations or...
That's a great example. And there were plugins to avoid that. For example, Linkable.
Could you repeat it?
Okay, what he said is that he would do bind model to make filtering work in pagination in a multi-level structure, which could be solved by plugins. So the interesting thing is that it's not like the framework made it impossible for you, it's just a bit harder. It's like the magic that it was envisioned from the start did not actually fit all the cases that most people is using now. The good news is that I'm very lazy. That's the good news. And for that reason, I didn't want to repeat those hacks anymore. So anything that I didn't want to code again is basically part of CakePHP 3. For example, the multi-save kind of thing for has and belongs to many is there. You can just pass an array of associated data and the framework will figure it out for you. And bind model, etc., you can now basically use contain, and contain knows how deep you want to go and how to filter based on the array you pass or the options you pass. And virtual fields, sad to say, are gone. But for that reason, because if you wanted to work with them, you had to hack. But we have plenty more options to work with virtual fields the correct way. If you want to do it in the server side, you can just use the query object to actually select fields, and the query object knows the alias of the table is very advanced. Or if you just want to, I don't know, concatenate two fields or just do a sum of some fields, you can do it at the entity level. Okay? Is anyone lost on what I'm talking about, like entity table? Did you get that from the basic workshop? Yes? Random person. What is the difference between a table and an entity? You get points for answering. Yes?
The table is a collection of entities and the entity represents the actual data.
Okay, he said that a table is a collection of entities and that each entity is the data itself, which is correct. Another way to look at it, a table is a table, so where all the rows are, and an entity is a row. The difference is that we emulate, kind of like in the past where you had like triggers in the database and you could do per row triggers, etc. Well, now we have it in PHP, so tables have their table methods and entities have their row methods. A question, random question again. If I have a method that will calculate the total sum of all the products in an order, where would you put that method? I'm not answering, so I need one.
I would put it in the entity.
You would put it in the entity.
In the order entity, that would contain that, and then you could count.
Okay. The correct answer is in both places is fine. It depends how you want to deal with the data. So in some cases you want to do it in the table. Actually not in the table, perhaps directly in the query. Why? Because if you're doing a batch processing of a lot of orders, then you probably want the sum of all products inside. So you don't want to post-process. The entity is also a good answer, because if I provide the entity with absolutely all the information that it needs to know, or it needs to calculate the total of the order, then it's a perfect place, because it's operating in memory, it's super fast, and it keeps it very dry. So dry as in don't repeat yourself. So you don't have it spread all over the code, you just have one single place that would do the only operation that you need. So great. Let's get familiarized with the ORM. Everyone has at least checked the CakePHP documentation for Cake 3? For version 3? Nope. Yeah. So read the FUC manual. RTFM. Just bookmark that page. It's the book, cakephp.org/3.0. If you are a CakePHP 2, let's say version 2 user, you would find, I think it's here in appendices, this document here will take you over all the differences between Cake 2 and Cake 3 at the level of models. So it's quite long. It has some examples on how to do it before, how to do it now. I totally encourage you to check that out, because it will answer a lot of questions for you. Okay, so we already had our application, the one that, there you go, that Jorge was doing. We have answers, organization, question types, questions, tags, and users. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick one of those tables, and I will use one by one the methods from a query, from the query object, to show you how it works. Are you okay with that? Tell me if it's too boring. But I think it's important to know or to understand how actually the ORM works. Let me see if Jorge was kind and had some code here. He is very kind. Thank you, Jorge. So I'm going to source, actually I'm just going to put some hacks. I love hacks. So in my config bootstrap.php, actually not there, I'm going to put them in bootstrap CLI. So there are two bootstraps. The first bootstrap is always executed. The second one is special code or special functions that you want to create only when you're running the CLI. CLI as in command line interface. And I really like to use the CLI for quick feedback on what I'm doing instead of hitting refresh on the page. So I'm going to create two functions. One is the pajamas function, PJ. You receive some data.
Could you scroll down?
Yes. And it returns, well, actually it doesn't return. It just echoes the JSON encode of the data with JSON pretty print and PHP EL. Thank you. What I'm missing, sorry? Data. Thank you. And, yeah, whatever. That's a pre-JSON, that's a pajamas, PJ. And the other will be, actually it's not a function, it's just a shorthand method for the CLI. I'm gonna alias a class. Would be cake ORM table registry. Remember what the table registry is? Okay, it's just a class that it's a factory class basically, that will instantiate your tables. And I'll alias it to R, so I don't have to type it every time. Save my file, so I go to source, and call console, cake console. Are you familiarized with a cake console shell? Raise your hands if you have. Only a few people. What it does is, do you know what a REPL is? I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly. Is it? Okay, a REPL is a shell or a command line tool that will basically emulate the workflow that you do in the browser, that you repeat some code and refresh. So if I write a command, I will immediately have the feedback of what I wrote. So instead of refreshing and having some controller code for testing, I just test it in console. Oops, I haven't created my app PHP. I'm just going to create it. So copy config app to config. There you go. Just gonna add some configuration. Here is root and no password, and the database is CakeFest. Oops, CakeFest, and that's it. I go again to source, execute console, and I'm now shown a prompt. Let me see if I can. It's like, unfortunately, just gonna make it smaller. Can everyone see Finder? Okay. Start again. There you go. So I'm presented with a prompt where I can just write PHP code. For example, I can just echo hello, and I get hello here. So hello.php end of line. I have it in a new line. So that's why I created my pajamas function. For example, pj of, I don't know, array hello world. Whoops. I get that. Okay? So I created my R class. I'm going to instantiate the table. So let's first take a look at what questions have as content. I have basically 3 questions of 3 different types created by the same user. So I'm going to say that my table equals R get questions. And now it immediately tells me everything was okay and you got an instance of questions table. So for example, if I do pajamas of table display field, I just get text, and the reason I get a null after that is because pajamas doesn't return anything. It just basically shows again. So a good way of fixing my pajamas function is to, in Bootstrap, CLI, instead of echoing, I just return, so I don't get the null at the end. I'll have to reload the console. I'm just going to create my table and pajamas of display field, and I get this. So it's now more readable. Fine. So let's start with the philosophy behind the ORM. There were multiple goals that we wanted to achieve with the new ORM. And personally, one that I wanted is that it had to be lazy. Lazy as it should not do an operation unless it was strictly necessary for the rest of the operation. So for example, if I do table find, I will get my result. But that's because I use the pajamas function. But if I just do, like for example, a debug, I just get a query object with the SQL and everything, right? But the SQL is actually not generated until you ask for it. So by doing debug, you're actually forcing the query to generate the SQL. By just calling find, it will do absolutely nothing. Perhaps it will try to get the schema. That's basically the only thing that it would do if you try to call find. So I want you to keep this information in mind. The query is lazy as long as possible. And I want you to keep that in mind because most of the operations that you want to do, you want to keep them lazy. It's possible. What is that reason? If you behave in that way, if you kind of code in this way, you will be able to compose queries out of other queries, which is very cool. For example, you could have a articles table with a published column, true, false. So you can say, well, give me all published articles. That returns a query, it doesn't return the results. And perhaps you have another finder called getActive. So you could actually disable. So true, false. So give me, from all the published, also give me the active. It still returns a query. From all the published that are active, only bring me the username. So he only selects username from the user that created the article. And so on and so on and so on. Until you have your query as exact, as precise as you want, then you can execute it. If you do that, if you don't execute the query beforehand, like as soon as possible, as Cake2 did, then you can actually compose and create richer queries. We're going to get plenty of examples of that in a minute. So find is an alias for find all. If I call this, it's exactly the same. Let me use pajamas because it's easier. As you can see, a quick way of getting the results, which is kind of what Cake3 lacks, like the immediate feedback of what the results look like, you can use this function to get it. So as you can see, find is an alias for find all. Find is like a wrapper that you can use to create more and more and more custom finders. So the default custom finders is find all, which means don't apply any logic to it. But one of the logics that you can apply is find list. Are you familiar with that from Cake2? It basically gets this array. But if you use the debug function, it returns a query. How can you explain that? How does a query know that without executing it, that at some point it should format the result somehow? Random person, how would you implement it?
So string?
You would implement a string what?
A function to string which is returning the array.
Well, yeah, that could be, but then you would have to cast the string. And this way, I just call pajamas, which is just JSON encode, or I could do something like this. You could do toArray. And also get the array. How would you implement it?
The JSON serializable interface?
Okay, maybe let's not get into the details. Forget about how the results are displayed. Or I'm actually curious, how would you implement that even though a finder returns a query, when you execute it and you get the results back,
It's query on query.
it's what?
It's query on query. It modifies the query.
It modifies the query, yes. Basically what you need is at the end something that knows, okay, the query was executed. I need the results, but someone told me that when results are fetched, they need to be made into a list instead of all the properties. Okay, does that make sense? So our first customization to a table is creating a custom finder. So I'm going to open my questions table. And let's create the custom finder. Creating custom finders is extremely easy. You just create a public function find, and you name the finder. So let's just have an idea. What kind of questions can we ask to questions? Aliens. One of the questions is who created it, like find by user ID. Another question could be find of a specific type, right? So let's create first finding by a specific type. Let's see if the question types. Okay, so let's imagine that yes, no means Boolean. So to give a more computer scientist name to that, sorry, let me just add here, I'm gonna rename it to range. And for this one is for neutral against. One word for that? Opinion. So our public function find, so let's find all the Boolean question types. So find Boolean question or questions, and all finders receive two arguments. The first one is a query, and the second one is an array of options, which is like this. And the absolute minimum that your custom finder should do is return the query that is passed. Okay? So one thing we can do is reload our console, use our table again, and now call table find Boolean questions. Let me use a pajama. It should return everything because I haven't customized anything. That's correct. So we have created a simple custom finder. Let's customize it and say where the column is called question type ID. Where the question type ID is, we're going to hard code it for now. Are you okay with that? Hopefully. We're going to make it better in a minute. Get R again, table, pajamas of Boolean questions. Whoopsie, sorry. Only one. So great. Now the good thing is that we can create another one. Public function, find range questions, query, options array. Let's do exactly the same. Whoops. I have only one of type 2. And now this is where the magic begins. What if I want to find all? I mean, it's not exactly how you do it in production, but let's imagine that you wanted to get a list of all questions of type 1, and then a list of questions of type 2. What would you do? You can think in terms of Cake 2. How would you do it? All questions of type 1, and then all questions of type 2. An OR, but the OR it will not help you with the order, right? So a restriction, you cannot use order by. Yeah, that's not how you would do in production, but I'm just gonna show you a nice feature. Yeah, well, in Cake 2 you would basically do a find, all question of this type, find the all question of the other type, array merge, right? Well, you can do that in Cake 3, well, you just say union, table, find. Well, I'm just going to invert the requirement, first range and then Boolean questions. And I have that. How do you think the query looks like? It's a single query with a union. So I start with this advanced kind of crazy example, so you get an idea of how to compose very simple functions into very complicated SQL. So I want you to think that those hacks and those things that you had to do in Cake 2 to get a complex finder are not necessary anymore if you know how to combine finders together. Okay, so what if, let me just change the user 1, and this one is 1 as well. What if I want just gonna mess up with the data a bit. I'm gonna assign a type 1 to this one. Actually, to this one here. Just gonna say the same type to this and to this one. 2. Okay, so I have 3 questions. Only one if of range type, and only one was created by user 3. The other was created by user 1. So the new requirement is Let me create the function. Public function find by user query options. So I'm just going to assume the user is there for now. User equals options. Is that user ID or yeah? Okay, so I'm going to create my first custom finder that gets options. So pj of table find by user and I need to pass the user. I have 2 questions by that user. And now the cool part begins. Like, bring me all questions created by user 1, but type 1. Find Boolean questions. So you can see that in a finder, I call again another finder. And I get exactly the result I want. Any questions so far?
Does this mean that magic finds have gone?
Nope. You
Find
know.
by user.
Yeah, I know.
Magic find, so
Yeah.
why would you write finder for something
You
like
can table find by user ID 1 is the same.
that? And you go to join those as well.
Yeah, you can join, of course. Find by user 1, find Boolean questions. A maze. Wow, so such red. Much development. Okay, any questions so far? Any warm fuzzies of what we're doing? You're a tough crowd.
Just looks like a lot of work to convert K2 code to this.
Yes.
Yes.
No, but to be fair, it's not that much. I have a very big application. It's not like it's going to take you a day, not a week, but very big chunks of code. After a bit of thought, you just say, oh, I can just convert this into a very small custom finder, this one, this one, this one, and you just compose that, and you get exactly the same results as in Cake 2. That would take you a lot of lines in there. So I've been converting a very big app to Cake 3. I don't know, more than 40% of the code is gone now by just converting to small custom finders. Okay, I'm just going to ask this question now. How many of you knew that Cake 2 had custom finders? How many of you used it? So not everyone that raised your hand actually used them. If you have a Cake 2 application and you want to upgrade your application faster, do this. It's not chainable in Cake 2 without some sort of hackery, but at least you can convert them one-to-one without much work. Okay. So that was custom finders. What is the result of, let me see the code. We have 2 of the same question type, Boolean questions. Or Or maybe, I have a better question. How do I get the first result? So easy. I'm asking that because somehow in IRC, people say, how do I get the first result? And somehow they missed that in the documentation. It's let's call first.
I know it because I got asking you so often.
Yeah, well, that was obviously a documentation omission. It's now more prominent. Now it repeated plenty times to get the first result called first. What is the immediate problem with first? That is not chainable anymore. So I cannot, for example, here I want to select just the text and I call first. That's what you expect. But then if I want to order by, I get the exception, of course, because it's not a query anymore. Hmm? Okay, well, you get an exception as well. Surprise. I say that not because, even though it's obvious, it's because you will often feel the need in a custom finder to do post-processing. So how do I do post-processing in a finder, in a custom finder? That's a very common question. So I'm gonna re-implement find list just to show you how to post-process the results and still return a query. Just gonna rename it to listy. Actually, let's make it more interesting. We now know that questions have types, but I would like, instead of having the ID, I would like to have the name of the question type as like the key of the array. And I want all questions grouped by their question type. Is that okay? So let's call it grouped by type. So to the query, I need to contain, because I need the name, I contain the question type. And yes, it's chainable. You can chain whatever you want. And to the contain, I will format the results. Let me put it in another line. It gets a function. Could be anonymous, could be a whatever callable function. Gets the results here. We just need to return them again. Okay, what this does, basically, so far it just contains the data for the question type. So, gonna get my table again and call table, find one, this, find grouped by type. Oh, that was derp, sorry. Find by, no more wine for me, by type. Is that correct? Group by type. There you go. Let me see what I missed. Questions is not associated with question types. Didn't put yes, is that correct? Question types? Yes. Okay, you have obviously all the questions. I haven't done anything in particular except that now I have question type. So the results, I want them returned, grouped by this property here called question type dot this other property here called name. Okay, so reload. There you go. Now I have Boolean, 2 questions, and then range, 1 question. That's awesome. Isn't it awesome? Yes, it is, and I will tell you why. Because you can still chain it. You can still say group by type and then find Boolean type, which is derp, but yeah. Boolean questions. And obviously we'll only return 1. That's cool. So hopefully, even though it's going to be a pain, admittedly, to migrate the Cake2 app, there are ways that you can lessen this pain because the code to produce the same result that you had in Cake2 is completely gone. For that function in Cake2 would take a lot more because you need an after find, and because of after find is kind of a bit weird, you need to check what type of association is getting, etc., etc. No one has asked one obvious question. What is result? Ask the question. What is results? Okay. Results is an instance of a class called result set. Result set is by coincidence also a collection. That means that anything that is inside this class can be used inside this little format results function. I'm just going to go over each function quickly so you have an idea of everything that you have. Each, it basically is like a array walk for each on the results. Call an anonymous function or whatever callable. Filter. I'm not going to use SQL anymore for filtering my results. I'm going to use raw PHP, so it will remove results from the result set. Reject kind of does the same, but just inversed. Every means that it's like each, but it will only return true or false if all the records inside that collection comply to a condition. You have sum, you have contains, which are versions of the same. Map is something that you will use a lot. Map is array map, basically. So for each one in the collection, call this function, and whatever I return, replace it with that. Want an example of that?
Yeah.
Yes. So I want do I have answers? Yeah. Let me see if I have answers here. Maybe not answers. Maybe organization. Yeah, let's do that. I'm just gonna create a virtual property on my results. Okay? So I'm gonna do public function find with organization name. It's not very useful, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So you get the organizations, format result, just returns the map with the function, which is the row itself. Return the row. If you don't want any heavy modification, I'm just going to create a virtual field called organization name, which is basically just the row organization get name. Well, just not necessary, just like this. Let me just make sure that organizations is something here. It's the user that belongs to organization, right? Yes. Organization have ID. So I cannot go directly to organizations, but I can go to users.organizations. And I can just user organization name. Organi
89.
line 89 here. Oh yes, thank you. Organization.
When you're doing containing two, you could pass an array in there as well, couldn't you, instead of doing a dot notation?
Of course you can, but this is lazier. I like lazy. You could actually go as deep as you like. You can go dot, 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 dot. It will figure out for you. Let's see, reload. Whoops, I need my table. Pajamas of with organization name. Okay, one of the organization had ID 0, so you will not see it, but here's one. Organization name, Morgan Industries. Again, the same, and this one didn't have organization because the user had the organization ID set to 0. That's how you create virtual fields. So I would like you to think of one of the hacks you did in Cake 2 regarding finds mostly, that you want to know how to do it in Cake 3 correctly. I have one in mind, and I think some of you mentioned one at the beginning. It was him. I'm just going to repeat it for him. The hack that he had was, how do I filter by associations? And more specifically, how do I filter by deep associations? And his answer to that was using a lot of bind model. So I'm actually not going to do this. I'm going to rewrite my find Boolean question and find range question because I don't actually know the ID that is going to be created in production for those type of questions in theory. So I'm just going to find it by name and get that type. Is that okay? Are you tired? Okay. If you're tired, we can just take a 10-minute break. Just going to rewrite this function to query contain question types. Here it needs to be an array because I'm going to do magic function. I'm going to show you two ways of doing the same thing. One is with a closure. Does that look okay? That's true. Do you understand what's happening here? The one that said yes, explain it to me. Okay. What this does is, whenever I need to find, or Cake needs to find, the question type, it will create a query. You don't know exactly how that works, but you know it's going to be a query. So you just need to tell the query, hey, filter that association by this question type. Okay? I think I made a mistake. 1 second. Question type 2, question type 1. Yeah, I made a mistake. I'm going to debug it so we can see the sequel. So I have left join question types, and that's my mistake. Where blah blah blah, and obviously where this is it. What is the problem? It's around here. Just more specifically around here, more specifically here. We need an inner join. So there are a couple ways of doing it. The most common way is just change the association. I'm a big fan of inner joins. Actually, that beat me a couple times. But I use inner joins for almost everything. It makes sense. So I'm just going to say here, is it type or join type? Can't remember. Join type, thank you. Looks better, so I'm going to execute it. And there you go, only 2. With the difference that now I have the data here. That is one way. I'm going to not tell you the second way today. That's perhaps too advanced. Oh. The other way that you can filter by association, instead of using a closure, if you don't want to type that much, let's do this exactly the same function. There's this way, there's this other, which is just you contain. I'm going to remove now my inner join, just for the example. I'm just going to contain on question types. And just say where question types dot name. Getting out of space. Is Boolean. That's range. What do you need? This is range. It's not. It's because I typed this. This would be range. Only one. So why does this work? Even though I have a left join, why do we still get the correct result? I can show you the sequel if that will help you. The answer is the where is here. So one trait of the new ORM, which is also inherited from the old ORM, and is a lot of my personal preference, is that it's not completely abstract. I mean, you can still think in SQL, so if you know the SQL that you want, then you can just type and you will get the SQL that you want. It's not like, for example, other ORMs, Doctrine, that you either traverse the objects or you write the raw SQL. So it requires a bit of getting used to writing SQL. Writing SQL is great for your skin, actually.
Can you change this? You mean you can change the SQL here? What do you mean, like, no, it's not like Doctrine?
No, you can change the sequence doctrine, that's for sure.
How do you change that example in SQL?
What I meant is, if you know what association type you're working with, you can actually know what SQL is going to be produced. It's not completely magic. So here, we know that this is going to generate a left join. I removed the inner join, remember? So by default, it's left join. And this, as I did not put it inside the contain, this will filter the full query, not just that association. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But it's complicated.
Okay. Here we can see that the where is outside. Yeah? And if I call Boolean questions, you can see that the condition is inside. There's no where outside. It's just left join on that condition. That means that it will go row by row checking, does this match? Yes, put it here. Does it match? No, put null. Does it match? Yes, put the rows. Otherwise null, and so on. So from that table, the main table that I'm finding, which is questions, it will find everything. And it will optionally put the rows from questions if it matches the conditions inside the on clause. Whereas the other version is only put rows from questions if, after getting the results from the other table, the type is not null and it matches this name.
So that's better, faster?
Is none of the above. It actually depends. What I'm trying to tell you is that you have full control of what is going to be produced. For example, what if I wanted, in this particular case, let me find with organization name. I'm going to write another version of that. Public function find with existing organism. Well, actually, let me reverse it. With missing organization. It's a bit long, but okay. So the question that I'm going to ask now is, how do I know what questions were created by a user with no organization? How do you do that? I'm going to let you think while I write my answer. Let's see if that works.
It's organizations.
Thank you. Only one, and that's correct. The one with organization equals null. Why does that work? I want someone to explain it to me.
Why did it do it?
Hmm?
Your question was why did it do it?
Yeah, why does it work?
Because you only want records where the organization is empty.
Okay, and why didn't I get all results?
Because you didn't look at the specific rows.
Exactly, because I put a query outside in the big query, not inside the small query. So if I look at the SQL that is generated by Cake for this, you can see that it does a left join, only one on condition, which is the default one, where it will trim out everything, basically, that has an organization. So is it better or faster or whatever? It actually doesn't matter much. In very few cases, actually putting conditions inside the on clause is way faster. But that's rare. I don't have a rule of thumb for this. I mostly put everything inside on, unless I want to do stuff like this. If I just want everything where some special condition does not match, and filter the big table with using that condition, I use this technique. Any questions?
Why do you need to put the is in the where clause? I
Yeah.
know that it's needed in SQL, but I think the page should be able to figure out that you are talking about the null value here. And you
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. The question is for safety. I'm going to show you why. Imagine that this query was meant to be used for deleting rows. So instead of doing that, I do like in Cake 2, and I pass this, like org, and I get the org from some function. Org equals this get current org, whatever. What does that return? Hmm? Yeah, exactly. What does that return? I made a typo. It returns null. So imagine that you had a tree structure of organizations, and you made a typo, oops, go through production, now my function returns null, and now my function returns delete everything where organization ID is null. Oh, that means all parents in the tree. If you have tree behavior, that means delete all my table. Yay, not fun. So the reason is, I want you to be sure that you want to pass null there. Actually, if you pass a value, if you pass 1, it will work. It's basically all with organization 1, which is basically none. But if you pass null, the is function will know for sure, oh, he meant that as an option. So it's safe to either pass null or a normal value. Yep, things you learn in production. That's an actual real-life example. I deleted a full database because of that.
Sorry, but instead of the null, if you use the same function as you used before,
Sorry?
instead of the null, in this example you example. But in the previous example, you use the function to retrieve the organization.
Yeah.
Is there a difference if I use?
Well, it doesn't matter how the nulls is constructed. It could be that you made a typo. It could be that you tried to read from the session and the session was not there because of something crashed, etc. But nulls can happen. PHP won't prevent that because there's no way you can type in something to tell it cannot be null in most cases.
In that case, the problem is inside the function. You are not using is or not using is.
I'm not sure. I'm not following. Perhaps someone that can listen better than me can explain.
But in K2, you needed yourself to differentiate to put is in the where.
Yes, in case you need to differentiate.
Yeah, with this, it's okay that you need to put is if you want it to be null, and put no is if you want to be sure that it cannot be null. This is okay,
Exactly.
but it was.
Yeah, now basically it's just a choice of thinking. Do I want null in this function to be allowed? Yes or no? Do I? Yes, okay, is. No, don't is. That's basically,
Yeah, but if you want this behavior in K2, you had to have two different.
no. The is will work if you pass a value or pass null. It will work, exactly, it's intelligent enough to say, oh, you pass a value that is not null, let me reconstruct this equal to say where this value equals this.
But this it's not true for K2.
This is not true for Cake2. In Cake2, you need to be careful to not delete your table. Yes.
How does in work? Like if we put an array,
Thank you.
And subqueries.
You know too much. You know too much, Jon Snow. So let me do a find by user. I actually had find by user before, right? Okay, that's great. So find by user. And it accepts this. Where user is 1. That means this. Now I need all from user 1 and 2. Sad pandas. What happened? Well, you can see here, you cannot pass an array. So, if you do want an array to be passed,
Why can't you do that anymore?
what if the same exact reason as is null? If you pass more than what you were supposed to pass, it's going to be bad. For example, why did it return here 1 and 1? Maybe I can pass something crazy, like foo.
Or you pass null again, right?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Here. Is this right? No. Oh, yeah, that's true. Not the sequel, you want the results. Brought the same results, why? Why did it bring the same results?
It's only by user who's working like that?
Yeah. It converted to an int. An array converted to an integer is 1. So I'm always going to delete everything where user equals 1. So I'm going to tell you what the exact flaw could be in your applications right now. You have something like an application that you get from getParams or from post, and you expect it to be user ID and it's a normal value. And you pass that to a query, and that works fine. But I'm really, really bad, like I say malicious. And then I say, I'm just going to put an array here. And then I'm finding everything from that user and that other, even though perhaps could not be the example, is not my account. And if you're using that query for deleting, you're not deleting only my stuff, you're deleting other people's stuff. So check your code when you get home. So one of the reasons is that, do you actually care if it's an array? Yes, put in. I don't care, I want to be protected by this. Don't. In this case, I do one in. So I'm gonna reload. Oops. Oh yeah, thank you. As you expect, nothing is matched. 1, it does match. If you want to see the sequel that this generates, now it has in. If you pass more than 1, more than 1. If you pass only 1, like this, it does that.
Going back an example to your where you put your where, does containable always join now? So in Cake 3 there's no linkable. So how, if
Okay, yeah.
in Cake 2 if you used containable and you went 3 or 4 models deep, it would start breaking it up into separate queries.
It still does that. That's a good question. But you have control over that as well. So let's start with deep associations that are not in the easy chain. And let's define the easy chain as the chain of associations that can always be joined. Why could an association be joined without problems? Can you name an example? Or what associations can be joined out of your experience in K2? What associations, when I do model find, and then you go to the query log, do you see in left join or inner join instead of having a separate query? Belongs to, that's 1, has 1. That's it. And why can they be joined? Because there's always a one-to-one correlation. So even though I join this to this, I'm not going to get duplicate rows because I can match one-to-one a row to another. That actually trips a lot of users. The fact that you get a different query for different associations. In other frameworks, you have absolutely no choice. You get another query. And that becomes harder because if you want to filter one by the other, then you have to write basically custom SQL. I admit this is actually a difficult part in CakePHP, but only because you have the choice. Okay? It's difficult because you kind of have to be aware or get familiarized on what is going to be generated as a join and what is not going to be generated as a join. Personally, I believe that it's not that hard to keep in mind that something is one-to-many and other stuff is one-to-one, right? It's not that hard because when you iterate over it, you already expect stuff be nested in an array or directly put in the results, right? So it's not hard to say, oh, what? It's an actual different relation. So let me see if there are any tags created. Nope. Let me just create a few tags. Old school way. Console, cake, server. Go, tags. New tag. Name. Could be fun. Boring. Interesting. Arousing. Let me associate some questions to the text.
You're getting too close to your code.
I'm going to associate this one to this one. I'm going to associate this one to these other ones. I'm can associate this one to this and this, and associate this one to this one and that one, whatever. If I check, should be as expect, yes. Oh, by the way, did Jorge explain the custom server, the built-in server? No? Okay, so that might be a surprise to you, sorry. If you don't want to install the LAMP stack right away, you can just go to the source folder and just hit console cake server. You will get where it was started. Go to your browser, and you will get a web server for you, like a super fast testing. Thank you, thank you.
That's the built-in PHP web server, only one request at a time?
Yes, yes. That means don't use it in production, right? Different ports with another web server to kind of proxy them. That would be amazing.
That's cool.
If you want subqueries instead of joins,
I'll get to that in a minute. Let's go and find with tags, just to know how the data is going to look like. Now I have with tags, and I can see that each question has the tags that I associated before to it. Okay, so nothing fancy. You already know this from Cake 2. The only difference is that now you get always a join data property which contains the properties or the columns from the join table. Any surprise there? Perfect. If I do the SQL, what happens? There are no tags there. Where are my tags? They're in a separate query. Why is it in a separate query? I want someone to explain it to me.
Belongs to many.
It belongs to many. That's in the list of associations that cannot be joinable. And they cannot be joinable because, as you can see, there are questions that have more than one tag. That means that if I joined, I would get repeated questions. Is that true? Have you experienced that problem before? It's not always a problem. I actually join a lot of stuff just to get duplicate. That's not always something bad. So, how do I filter by tags? So we have this special method now, or concept that you are not used to from Cake 2. It's called matching. So you can call query matching tags. So final questions matching tags that you receive a query. I'm going to use the tag name, where tags.name equal tag. Does it look similar to something that we have done before? It's exactly the same as contain with a this is called internally a query builder. So it's a contain with a query builder, but instead of contain, it's called matching. So his question is, can you join an association that is not joinable? Yes, you can when you use matching. So find tagged with a tag. Was it aroused, right? Yips. Did not return a query. Oh, that's true, sorry. You have to return a query. So now we see that it joins on tags where the tags.name here equals something. That's cool. Let's see what the result is. No one. It's not aroused, it's arousing, right? Yeah. Arousing. There you go. I have exactly 2 questions that were tagged with arousing. Isn't that awesome? How much code do you have to do in Cake 2 to get the same result? Like a lot. Except if you use linkable and you understand linkable. I'm sorry because of that, because linkable is like a gem that does everything that Cake 3 does, but no one knows how to use it. So yeah. What is the problem with this?
Queries would get pretty big if you have 3 or 4 models.
That's not a problem. MySQL is fine with big queries. As long as you have the correct indexes, MySQL is very happy if you pass a big query. Another problem is not performance. What happens if you join something that is one too many? I told you already. I just want you to repeat because I want to make sure you understood the problem. You get duplicates. Why didn't I get duplicates here? Because the join table contains unique associations. So there's only one association from one question to one tag. So I will never get duplicates and don't need to think about it. But if you expect duplicates, there would be, for example, where, I don't know, just gonna pass a query, new expression, 1 equals 1. So match crazily. Table. No. It's not query, it's Q, sorry. Q. There you go. Now here I have my condition, 1 equals 1. Doesn't make much sense for this example, but I just want to see duplicate results. So now I see a lot of questions. 1 per each tag, right? So imagine that I want only unique question IDs. So I execute the same, and I tell it to distinct on. Sorry? Thank you. Distinct on, so only do distinct on one column, which is questions.id. Oops. Is questions.id. And I made another mistake. Okay, sorry. There you go. And I have 1, 2, 3 questions. Have anyone ever used distinct on? No? How many of you use Postgres? None. So you have actually never heard of distinct on. And that's because MySQL doesn't have distinct on. So one cool thing about the ORM is that it generates the correct SQL for different implementations of the same feature. It groups by that column, so it will remove duplicates. So it's 3:45. I'm going to take 10 minutes break. You can go to the toilet, drink some water, and we'll be back.